I did my overview economic talk to start the session yesterday. So what I usually do if I do a second talk at one of these events is just go through the companies who are here that I own and try to do the elevator pitch of why I own each one. Because as much as lots of information is great, it can also be overwhelming, especially when you're presented with 20-odd companies in a short period of time. So I think the elevator pitch can sometimes be quite useful in crystallizing at least what I think is the value driver for each of these stories. That said, there are some stories out there as well that I don't own, that I've either owned previously or I'm thinking of owning down the road. So there's other good stories out there, but these are the ones that are currently in the Resource Maven portfolio. They're mostly in alphabetical order, organized, I think, by explorers, advanced explorers, and then royalty plays. So I'm not trying to play favorites in terms of when I speak about each of these. So Abin, starting with AB, definitely gets to go first. So Abin, in an early session yesterday, hopefully you can still remember the story. Big part of the story here is location, right? The Golden Triangle has driven a lot of investor excitement over the last few years, the Pretium mine being a big part of that, but there's been the GT Gold discovery, there was the Garibaldi nickel situation. An area that investors are really interested in. Receding glaciers have exposed a lot of ground, new roads have made it a lot more accessible. That's why people are so interested in it. Abin put together a land package that's long and skinny, but it tracks the right kinds of rocks, which is two different formations meeting, and it's where those two formations meet that almost all of the gold in the Golden Triangle is found. There was some interesting historic work that had happened. They really brought that work together, had a short field season last year, but what's exciting this year is they're going back with much more understanding of structure, of potential, of what the old data means, with more soil sampling information. So yes, I think their odds of success are fairly good this year, and they're getting in there nice and early, so hopefully they can get news out and get some of that area play excitement that is likely to exist again in the Golden Triangle this summer. Allegiant Gold, spun out of Columbus only at the beginning of the year. This is the situation where Columbus had this portfolio of projects, most of them in Nevada, and the portfolio was put together by Andy Wallace. Andy Wallace has discovered and put 5 mines into production in Nevada. He is a legend in Nevada, and he has slowly been accumulating in this portfolio the projects that he thought offered the best odds of success that he could get his hands on. Now that portfolio is getting focused exploration attention for the first time. The flagship in that portfolio is called Eastside. It has 750,000 ounces of gold already at surface, heap leachable, and they're working to expand that. Is doubling the resource in the near term likely? I think it probably is. So good value asset in that advanced project, but then 9 other projects that will get drilled this year. They're not going to hit on all of them. That's not how exploration works. I mean, it would be great if it were, but that isn't how exploration works. They will miss on a bunch of them, but when you have 9, and when they come from a team with the caliber of Andy and his group, then your odds of success are higher. So lots of swings, and hopefully they'll hit something out of the park. Cabral, this is a really inexpensive story, largely because the market, I think, at this point doesn't realize that it exists. But what I like about Cabral is there's this large resource. They have 1.3 million ounces of gold already established. They are about to update that resource with 22,000 meters of drilling that wasn't incorporated previously, drilling that was done back in 2012. So that resource is about to grow. He wouldn't have said, I'm allowed to say things like, will it be 1.5 million, will it be 1.6 million ounces? I think it'll be something in that ballpark. So that's a really good valuation backstop to just have a big resource like that. But what I think is more exciting is they have that backdrop, and against that they're going out and assessing literally dozens of very high-grade targets. These are veins sticking out of the surface. This is a huge golden soil anomaly. This is in a placer region that produced the largest placer gold rush in the world. So I think this is the potential to generate the kind of high-grade drill discovery excitement that the market loves right now, but with the backdrop of this big resource that provides that sort of valuation basis, right? And it's really inexpensive because it's a brand new story right out the gate, super tight share structure, and management owns almost half the shares, which is a good thing. Great Bear. In Red Lake, gold can be very high grade, but it's very narrow. These are narrow. Chris likes to put his arms out like this, right? The average width is about 2 meters that you find your gold in Red Lake. But where you find a lot of it, like really rich deposits, right? So the area just right around Red Lake has 40 million ounces of gold proven and produced. This asset has a zone that has produced really consistent hits on drilling, better than 3 grams per ton gold in sort of 70 of 73 holes initially. That kind of consistency is very unusual in Red Lake, where you often miss on as many holes as you hit. So the consistency of gold is great, but what's more exciting here is that now they're tracking the structure from the zone that they've looked at down to where it hinges. Hinges are a great structure to look for gold in Red Lake. Up the other side, where they think there might be a parallel zone that they're calling the South Limb, and then way up to the northwest, where the structure continues, and they keep not only hitting structure, but hitting gold. So at this point, they have found gold in structure on 2.5 kilometers of strike, and they're only just near the surface. Gold often gets better with depth in Red Lake. They haven't even gone deep yet because they haven't needed to. The opportunity here is really quite interesting as a high-grade new gold discovery in a really popular and prolific jurisdiction with a very tight share structure. You can see only 23 million shares out. So that creates a lot of opportunity for share price performance when/if there is success with the drilling. New Dimension Resources, you haven't heard that story yet. You will shortly, because Eric is up on stage here with me. This is a new company that reunites a management team with its old portfolio. And that's happening for a good reason. This management team that had that portfolio made a phenomenal discovery, and then that phenomenal discovery took all of their attention, sent them to Turkey for a few years. Then they sold their company to Sandstorm because Sandstorm wanted that asset because it was so good. Because it was a corporate transaction, Sandstorm ended up with all the other stuff that that company had, and so all those other things have now ended up in 2 new companies, one of which is New Dimension. So New Dimension took on the Argentine assets. Eric and his team really liked these assets, had started working on these assets, had lots of plans for how to follow up on these projects, but then got distracted by really great success somewhere else. So now they're back in Argentina. This company only listed 2 weeks ago, so it's a new trading situation. Again, similar to some of the ones that I've just mentioned, it's inexpensive at this point, largely because the market just doesn't know the story well yet, doesn't know a lot about what's going on. But because they know these assets so well, they're about to start drilling. This is not, okay, now we have to go and do soil sampling, and we have to go do geophysics, and we have to figure out what the targets are. Those things are all really, really important, but they've already been done because this team is already very familiar with these assets. So they're going down to drill right now. And the focus is on high grade because they know that's what the market wants right now. There's high grade opportunities at the flagship project that they're looking at. And the area that they're working in Argentina is really mining country. So there's a lot of understanding from Eric and his team from previous discoveries they've made in the area of what they're looking for. And there's a lot of optionality for what you might be able to do with discoveries in this area should you find them, because there's so many operations. There's mills that need feed. There's companies that want to operate down there. So that's New Dimension. Again, inexpensive because unknown. Playfair will be coming up later today in the final session of the day. Playfair is in Ireland. The Dalradian Resources has this Corregano discovery. Well, it's a deposit. It's a large deposit now. I think it's over 5 million ounces of high-grade gold. The rocks that is hosted in sort of go undercover, and then they resurface again down in Ireland. And where they resurface is at Ox Mountain, where Playfair has their project. They also have similar structures to what exists where that deposit is. So that was the driver that brought the team to Ox Mountain. They did a bunch of, nobody's ever looked for gold here before. They found rock fences in sheep fields, and the rock fences had chunks of gold in the rocks, and they're like, well, that's interesting. That must have come from somewhere. So this is early stage exploration. They've done one drill program. All 10 holes hit gold. Nothing super dramatic, but some nice grades in there as well. Now it's a matter of figuring out what direction does this thing go in and how big could it possibly be. They've raised money. They're about to start drilling again. So a really interesting early stage, inexpensive gold explorer in Ireland. Then prize mining, again, something that you haven't heard about yet, but you will hear the story shortly. This is in Mexico. When I was talking about copper in my presentation yesterday, I was talking about, we're looking ahead at a very significant copper supply deficit. And copper producers in the world are really starting to look for what acquisitions can we make. What do they want? Well, they want acquisitions that are big if possible, and they want acquisitions that are easy, not the deal itself being easy, but the mine being relatively easy. So metallurgy that works, a region that works, infrastructure that exists, those sorts of things. The asset Manto Negro that Prize is looking at here, they're just getting going on the ground down there, but it has the potential to offer all of those things. It has the potential to offer beds of oxide copper, so that means it could be heap leachable, that's probably open pittable, and that looks like it has the potential for a lot of size. They're brand new down there. The two big questions that they have to answer is, how big are these things? The mantos outcrop along hillsides, and you can track them for 30 kilometers. So we've got to figure out continuity. We've got to figure out how deep into the hillside do these things continue, so how big is it? And then we've got to figure out, does it leach? It certainly appears to leach. Artisanal miners leach it themselves, but metallurgy is the other question. But if those answers come back even middle of the road, let alone good, this has the potential to become a high-value copper asset in a short period of time. Moving on to more advanced projects, we have Fireweed Zinc. So Fireweed is, I guess, now a year old. I think it was either the end. I think it was the end of May. Maybe it was almost exactly a year ago that they started trading. In the last year, they've done a huge amount, really. They've significantly expanded their resource so that they now have one of, if not the largest, high-grade zinc resources controlled by a junior in the world. And then they needed to do something else with that. The project is in Yukon. It's in eastern Yukon. It's on a road, but it's on a very long road. So the question everybody had is, can this thing work? It's in the middle of nowhere. Can it work? So the very first thing they did was address that question. They just published a PEA, and the PEA says, yes, it works. It works at the size that it is right now with conservative assumptions. And so that's really important because going forward, any value that they can add in terms of either growing the resource or, more importantly, improving the resource, adding some high-grade sections or adding sections that fit into a mine plan early on that carry good value, all of that becomes gravy to economic numbers that are already good just from where it is right now. So they did that PEA. Now they're going to go back into the field for only their second kick at the can. Last year was their first season in the field. Now they're going in for round two. They're going to work on improving that resource, and then they're also going to continue to de-risk the economic side of it by adding a bunch of information that you have to make assumptions on when you're doing a PEA. Things like, what does the pit actually look like? What does the waste rock do? All kinds of questions that you have to make assumptions on. I think this thing, the PEA was a really important point for this story. This thing works, and it can probably get quite a bit better from here. Again, another very tight share structure, only 30 million shares outstanding on Fireweed. Integra. The new Integra is in Idaho, looking at the Delamar and Florida Mountain projects that I think they're collectively just calling Delamar. This is the tale of two histories, to steal George's line, right? This is the one where in the late 1800s, guys were like literally having gun battles underground as they fought each other to mine the high-grade veins. There's like quite a crazy story about a gun battle that happened underground there because the veins are so rich. So that happened in the late 1800s, early 1900s. Then Kinross in the 70s came in and started mining the low-grade stuff that's at surface. And that worked well. Collectively, those two periods produced 1.5 million ounces of gold, a bunch of silver. There's still a lot more there. These two projects together, they're right side by side, have over 3 million ounces of gold equivalent defined right now as this lower grade. I mean, it's still 0.7 grams gold equivalent, so not terrible, but low grade stuff at surface. That in itself is a pretty valuable asset. If you can show that it's heap leachable, it's in a functional jurisdiction, it's in a brownfield site, it's very permittable, that in itself is quite valuable. And then underneath that, how much more of that high grade that those guys used to shoot each other for still exists? So that's the real question. Nobody's looked at that high grade with a drill ever. So Integra's figuring out, is proving up and expanding the lower grade stuff at surface while continuing their drills to depth to see how much of the high grade there might be below. Still a pretty new story, known to the market because Integra's the Integra team is very well known and they talk about their story quite a bit, but a good tight share structure and cash in the bank to continue for the rest of the year. Then the last two in the Maven portfolio who are here at the show are both royalty plays. One of them is Ely Gold Royalty. This is a kind of an interesting business plan. It's basically it's a few people who have very clear and unique knowledge of who owns what and how in Nevada. And they're very good at sort of going back. They're either through developing relationships with people who've owned claims forever or owned royalties forever, or watching how what gets dropped, what gets picked up. They're able to piece together projects that just basically aren't available to others because you need to have this sort of inside knowledge of how Nevada works and who owns what. They can piece these things together for very little money, and they can add value to those through some basic work, and then they vend the projects out. And so it's a royalty portfolio that's organically generated through these inexpensive means. They have a very large portfolio. Half of their projects are partnered out, and they more than cover their costs because their costs are quite modest, and between royalty payments and advanced royalty payments and project payments and the like, they more than cover their costs. So, and they're doing this all in the most popular gold jurisdiction in the world. I mean, Nevada probably earns that title. So in terms of scale, sort of a smaller scale business model, but with the potential to get really good when the market goes because they're laying a lot of groundwork now on a lot of projects, and do things like pick up ground that, you know, if there's a player here and there's this weird patchwork of claims going on over here that this guy really needs, they'll do the legwork to put that together, and then that becomes an asset that the neighbor really needs. So a really cool business model that takes advantage of unique knowledge and abilities and relationships in Nevada. And last, but most certainly not least, EMX Royalty always used to call themselves a project generator, but certainly now a royalty generator. The rationale there being to have a whole bunch of small stakes or partnered stakes in projects all over the world is really complicated, but to have a portfolio of royalties is a lot more straightforward, and guess what? Pays you money instead of costing you money. So EMX has been doing this for a long time. They now have a lot of income from royalties that they've either generated organically. This is an incredibly strong technical team. I was telling Eric this morning, I think even their accountant is probably a geologist because like everybody is a geologist. Most of them are named Dave as well, but so they're all geologists named Dave, but they're really good at what they do, and they have organically generated a lot of royalties, copper, gold, and base metals, so diversified across the metals spectrum. They also have purchased royalties when the opportunity presented. The Leeville royalty that they purchased in Nevada now pays them millions of dollars a year. So their costs are basically covered from the income that they get from all of these royalties that they've built or bought on their own. So that in itself is really cool. That means that they can continue to go out there, use their technical expertise, find new opportunities, and grow this portfolio with their costs covered, therefore protecting you as the shareholder from dilution. Then they also make strategic investments. They don't do a lot of these, but when they do them, they can work out pretty well. And the one that I think is primed to generate some news shortly is owning 40% of a company that owns 50%, stick with me, I know that sounds complicated. They own 40% of a company that owns 50% of an asset. That asset is a huge, like huge porphyry district in the far east of Russia. It is one of the big new developing copper gold porphyry discoveries in the world. It's a joint venture with Freeport. Scotiabank is currently marketing that asset for sale. I think there's going to be news. EMX has given us good reason to believe that that thing's going to get sold really soon. They took out a high-interest short-term loan from Sprott. You don't take out a high-interest short-term loan from Sprott unless you're pretty sure you're going to be able to pay that back like right away. And I think they're going to be able to pay that back right away because they're about to sell this thing, which will put like $100 million into the bank. So that's like, you know, a fairly significant event for a small company. So that's EMX. All of these, obviously, there's a lot more to know about each of these companies, but like I say, just trying to capture the elevator pitch version of the story as best I can in a few minutes, and it looks like I'm 10 seconds over, so I will stop talking about my portfolio now. And instead, I think Mike is up.